The mother of Carlos Alcaraz is scared for her son, after unhealthy comparisons with Rafael Nadal. She has spent 7 years watching her son become a global superstar while deliberately staying in the shadows. She worked at IKEA as a shop assistant while raising 4 boys. She kept the family grounded when fame threatened to overwhelm them. She provided the emotional backbone that allowed Carlos to conquer the tennis world. But when she finally spoke in the Netflix documentary, My Way, what she revealed wasn't a celebration. It was a warning. People expect him to be like Rafa Nadal, a legend, Virginia said, her voice carrying the weight of a mother who sees danger nobody else recognizes. But he shouldn't let them interfere in that area. I don't want my son to turn into a broken toy. A broken toy. Those 3 words expose the hidden cost of being Carlos Alcaraz. Because the biggest threat to his career isn't Jannik Sinner's backhand, or Novak Djokovic's mental fortitude, or the physical demands of the tennis schedule. It's the crushing weight of expectations that turned a compliment into a psychological trap. And what Virginia's warning reveals about the price of greatness changes everything we thought we understood about pressure in professional sports. Let's be clear about what Carlos Alcaraz has achieved. At 22 years old, he's already won 7 Grand Slam titles. He's completed the career Grand Slam faster than Federer, Nadal, or Djokovic. He's been world number 1 twice, finishing as year-end number 1 in both 2022 and 2025. He's won 8 Masters 1000 titles. He's defeated all 3 members of the Big Three at their peak. By any objective measure, Carlos Alcaraz is already one of the greatest tennis players of his generation. He's on track to potentially become one of the greatest of all time. So why is his mother worried he'll become a broken toy? Because she sees what the rest of us miss. She sees the comparison that's supposed to be an honor slowly transforming into a burden. She watches people praise Carlos by measuring him against Rafael Nadal's legacy, never realizing that every comparison adds another pound to the psychological weight he carries onto every court. Think about what it means to be constantly compared to Rafael Nadal. We're not talking about being measured against a good player, or even a great player. We're talking about being evaluated against someone who won 22 Grand Slam titles, who defined an entire era of tennis, who became synonymous with grit and determination and never-say-die competitiveness. Someone who is, by universal consensus, one of the 3 or 4 greatest players in tennis history. That's the standard Carlos is expected to meet. Not just match, exceed. Because if you're going to be the next Rafa, simply being as good isn't enough. You have to be better, younger, faster, more dominant. And Virginia Garcia, watching from the player's box, understands exactly what that expectation is doing to her son. The comparison started early. From the moment Carlos burst onto the ATP scene at 19, winning his first Grand Slam at the 2022 US Open and becoming the youngest world number 1 in history, people immediately drew the parallel. Here was another Spanish prodigy, another clay court specialist from the same country, another player with that rare combination of power and finesse. Of course he was the next Nadal. Initially, Carlos embraced it. Who wouldn't? Being compared to Rafael Nadal when you're an emerging teenager is the ultimate compliment. It means people see greatness in you. It means your potential is unlimited. But Virginia watched the narrative evolve. And she saw when the compliments started becoming a cage. In the Netflix documentary, she wasn't the only one who expressed concern. Juan Carlos Ferrero, then still Carlos's coach, said, "I've been hearing that Carlos is the new Rafa." His tone carried frustration, not pride. Because Ferrero understood the psychological trap. Every time someone called Carlos the new Rafa, they were simultaneously erasing his individual identity and setting an impossible standard. Carlos Alcaraz Sr., the father who coached his son from age 4, was even more direct. Hearing that your son is the new Rafa and all that is great. But on the court, it works against you. It's a lot of pressure. There it is. The admission from the people who know Carlos best. The comparison that's supposed to inspire actually undermines. It doesn't lift him up, it weighs him down. Because here's what most fans don't understand. When you constantly tell someone they need to be like someone else, you're implicitly telling them that who they are isn't enough. That their own achievements only matter insofar as they approach someone else's legacy. That their value is relative, not absolute. Carlos Alcaraz isn't failing if he only wins 15 Grand Slams instead of 22. But the Nadal comparison makes it feel like he is. He isn't disappointing anyone if he loses in a Grand Slam quarterfinal. But when you're supposed to be the next Rafa, Every loss becomes evidence that you're falling short of destiny. That's the psychological burden Virginia is trying to protect her son from. And she knows about psychological burdens. While Carlos's father provided the tennis expertise, coaching him from childhood, managing the club where Carlos trained, traveling to tournaments, Virginia provided something equally essential: normalcy. She worked at IKEA as a shop assistant. Not because the family needed the money after Carlos started earning millions, but because maintaining ordinary life mattered. She kept the family grounded in El Palma, the small town in Murcia where Carlos was born. She cooked the meals Carlos still craves when he's on tour. She made sure that when Carlos came home, he wasn't a tennis superstar, he was just her son. When I'm not traveling, I still live with my parents and my 3 brothers in El Palma, Carlos has said. There, I'm just a normal guy to them. That normality is Virginia's gift to her son, and she's fiercely protective of it. Because she understands that fame destroys people not through failure, but through losing their sense of self. When your entire identity becomes wrapped up in being the next, insert legend here, you stop being you. You become a performance, a brand, a projection of other people's expectations, and eventually you break. That's what Virginia means by broken toy. She's watching an industry, sports media, fans, sponsors, everyone, play with her son's identity. Picking him up, examining him, comparing him to Nadal, praising him when he matches the comparison, criticizing him when he falls short, using him to fill the void left by the Big Three's retirements. And she knows that toys, no matter how cherished, eventually break from too much handling. The Netflix documentary where Virginia made these comments is titled My Way, a reference to Frank Sinatra's iconic song about living life on your own terms. And that title choice is significant, because the entire documentary is Carlos's attempt to assert his own identity against the weight of expectations. He talks openly about prioritizing enjoyment alongside excellence, about wanting to celebrate victories rather than just moving on to the next tournament, about valuing time with family even when it means slightly less training, about being Carlos Alcaraz, not the next anyone. And the documentary reportedly contributed to his split with one Carlos Ferrero, because Ferrero's disciplined, demanding approach clashed with Carlos's my way philosophy. Ferrero wanted more training in Villena at his academy. The Alcaraz family wanted Carlos training near home in Murcia. Ferrero wanted single-minded focus on tennis excellence. The Alcarazes wanted balance. That split, painful as it was, might have been Carlos asserting the very independence his mother was advocating for, choosing his own path rather than following the prescribed route to becoming the next Nadal. But Virginia's concern goes deeper than just coaching philosophies. She's worried about burnout, about the psychological exhaustion that comes from never feeling like you're enough as yourself, about what happens when every achievement is immediately contextualized against someone else's legacy. Consider what Carlos has accomplished at 22. He's the youngest man to complete the career Grand Slam. That's his record, his achievement, something only 8 other men in the Open era have ever done, and he did it younger than all of them, including Nadal, who was 24 when he completed it. But how is that achievement framed in media coverage? Alcaraz beats Nadal's record to become youngest with career Grand Slam. Even his individual triumph is reported as a comparison to Nadal. When Carlos won Wimbledon in 2023, defeating Djokovic in an epic 5-set final, the headline wasn't just Alcaraz wins Wimbledon. It was, is Alcaraz the heir to Nadal's throne? His greatest victory became another data point in the comparison narrative. This is what Virginia is trying to protect him from. The constant reframing of his individual achievements as progress toward becoming someone else. And she's right to be worried, because tennis history is filled with prodigies who couldn't handle the weight of expectations. Players who were supposed to be the next, insert legend, and crumbled under that pressure. Look at what happened to players labeled the next Sampras, or the next Federer. Most of them had solid careers, won some titles, made respectable livings. But they never became legends themselves, because they spent so much energy trying to fill someone else's shoes that they never figured out what shoes fit them. The difference with Carlos is that the Alcaraz family sees the trap. They're actively trying to avoid it. Virginia's warning in the documentary wasn't casual commentary. It was a public declaration of boundaries. A message to the tennis world. Our son is not your replacement Rafa Nadal. He's Carlos Alcaraz. Judge him on his own merits. But here's the cruel reality. They can't control the narrative. Virginia can warn against comparisons all she wants, but she can't stop commentators from making them. She can't prevent fans from expecting Nadal-level dominance. She can't shut down the headlines that measure every Carlos achievement against Rafa's timeline. And that's what makes this situation so psychologically complex. Because Carlos is trapped between two impossible demands. On one hand, there's the explicit message from his family: be yourself. Don't let comparisons define you. Your worth isn't measured against someone else's legacy. On the other hand, there's the implicit message from the entire tennis world: you're the heir to Nadal's throne. Live up to it. Every time you fall short of what Rafa did at your age, you're disappointing us. How do you navigate that contradiction? How do you maintain your own identity while the world insists on defining you through someone else? The answer, apparently, is by having a mother who fights for you, who speaks up when she sees the pressure building, who reminds everyone, including her son, that there are more important things than matching someone else's trophy count. After Carlos won the 2023 Madrid Open, he wrote on the camera lens, "Por ti, mama, for you, mom." It was Mother's Day in Spain, and he couldn't buy her a gift because he was at the tournament. So he gave her a victory instead. That moment reveals the dynamic. Carlos's greatest motivation isn't matching Nadal's legacy. It's making his mother proud. And Virginia has made it clear that her pride doesn't depend on him becoming Rafa 2.0. For me, it's more important that people say Carlos is a very good person than a good tennis player, she said. That priority, character over championships, is Virginia's North Star. And it's the counterweight to all the external pressure about Grand Slam counts and #1 rankings. But here's where the story gets even more psychologically complex. Because Carlos himself has internalized both messages. He knows his family wants him to forge his own path. But he also respects Nadal immensely and understands that the comparison comes from a place of admiration. At first, being compared to Rafa was incredible, Carlos has admitted. But as time goes on, you realize it creates pressure. I want to be known as Carlos Alcaraz, not as the next anyone. That evolution, from embracing the comparison to resisting it, shows psychological maturity. Carlos is learning to separate external expectations from internal identity. He's claiming ownership of his career on his terms. But it's a daily struggle, because every interview includes Nadal questions. Every tournament preview mentions the comparison. Every achievement is measured against Rafa's timeline. The narrative is inescapable. And this is what Virginia sees. She watches her son trying to build his own legacy while constantly being measured against someone else's. She sees the psychological toll of never quite being enough as yourself. She recognizes the early warning signs of what could become destructive. A broken toy. Those words haunt because they're so visceral. Virginia isn't talking about career burnout or competitive decline. She's talking about her son's spirit. About the internal fire that makes him special. About the joy he brings to tennis. And she's warning that constant comparison could extinguish that fire. That telling someone they need to be like someone else eventually makes them lose sight of who they are. That even champions break when the pressure becomes about meeting other people's expectations rather than fulfilling your own potential. The tragic irony is that Rafael Nadal himself has echoed these concerns. When asked about the Alcaraz comparisons, Nadal has consistently said they're unfair and create unnecessary pressure. He knows firsthand what it's like to be measured against legends. He spent his career being compared to Federer. And he understands that the comparison narrative can become toxic. Carlos is Carlos, Nadal has said. He shouldn't have to be like me or like anyone else. He should be himself. But Nadal's endorsement of Carlos's individuality doesn't stop the comparison machine. If anything, it fuels it. Now people compare how graciously Nadal handles the comparison to how Carlos should handle it. Even the conversation about not comparing them becomes another comparison. It's a maze with no exit. And Virginia Garcia is trying to give her son a map out of it. Her strategy is remarkably simple. Keep him grounded. Remind him that home is where he's just Carlos, not the next Rafa. Maintain family dinners and normal routines. Make sure he knows that his worth to them has nothing to do with Grand Slam titles. She's creating a psychological sanctuary, a place where the comparisons don't penetrate, where achievement is celebrated for its own sake, not measured against someone else's timeline. And crucially, she's speaking publicly about the pressure. By voicing her concerns in the Netflix documentary, Virginia is sending a message to the tennis world. We see what you're doing. We know the expectations you're placing on our son. And we're telling you it's too much. That takes courage. Most parents of elite athletes stay silent. afraid that speaking up will create more pressure or make their child seem weak. But Virginia has decided that protecting Carlos's mental health matters more than maintaining a perfect public image. She's chosen to be the voice that says, maybe we should let this 22-year-old be himself instead of forcing him into someone else's mold. The question now is whether anyone will listen. Because here's the reality. The tennis world needs Carlos to be the next Nadal. The sport is facing a transitional moment. The big three dominated for 2 decades, and now they're gone. Federer retired. Nadal retired. Djokovic is in his twilight. The sport desperately needs a new face, a new legend, a new player who can capture global imagination. And Carlos Alcaraz, with his explosive game and charismatic personality, is the perfect candidate. Except the sport doesn't want him as Carlos Alcaraz. It wants him as Nadal's replacement. The Spanish prodigy who continues the legacy. That's an unfair burden. But it's the burden Virginia sees crushing her son. And she's right to worry. Because the history of sports is littered with broken toys. Prodigies who burned out young. Champions who achieved everything externally while losing themselves internally. Athletes who spent their careers being someone else's vision of greatness and forgot to discover their own. Carlos has advantages those athletes didn't. He has a mother who sees the danger. A family that prioritizes his well-being over his trophy count. A foundation that keeps him connected to who he was before fame. But he also faces pressure unlike anything previous generations experienced. Social media means every match is dissected by millions. Streaming means every practice session can be watched globally. Sponsorships mean his personal brand is worth hundreds of millions. The scrutiny is relentless. The expectations are suffocating. And through it all, there's the constant whisper. You're supposed to be like Rafa. You're supposed to be a legend. Anything less is failure. That whisper is what Virginia is fighting against. She's trying to replace it with a different message. You're already enough. Just being Carlos Alcaraz is enough. Your worth isn't measured by someone else's standards. Whether that message can penetrate the noise of global expectations remains to be seen. What we know is this. Virginia Garcia worked at IKEA while her son became a tennis prodigy. She raised 4 boys with limited resources, but unlimited love. She kept her family grounded through Carlos's meteoric rise. She protected his childhood, while others wanted to accelerate his development. She prioritized his character, while others focused on his forehand. And now, watching her son stand at the summit of tennis, youngest to complete the career Grand Slam, 7 major titles at 22, arguably the most talented player of his generation. She's not celebrating without reservation. She's worried, because she sees what success costs. She watches the comparisons chip away at her son's identity. She recognizes that being the next Nadal means never being enough as yourself. And she's brave enough to say it publicly. To warn the tennis world that they're playing with fire. That comparing her son to a legend isn't inspiring him. It's breaking him. I don't want my son to turn into a broken toy. Those words should terrify everyone who loves tennis. Because they're a mother's recognition that we're watching something beautiful potentially being destroyed by expectations. That the sport's desperation for a new legend might ruin the very person who could become one. If Carlos Alcaraz is going to achieve his full potential, it won't be by becoming the next Rafael Nadal. It will be by becoming the first Carlos Alcaraz. By forging his own path, setting his own standards, building his own legacy. And that requires something radical from the tennis world. Letting him be himself. Can we do that? Can we celebrate Carlos for who he is rather than measuring him against who he isn't? Can we allow him the freedom to build a career on his own terms without constantly comparing it to someone else's? Virginia Garcia is begging us to try. She's asking us to see her son as a complete person, not a replacement part for the legend we lost. She's pleading for the space to let Carlos discover his own greatness without the crushing weight of someone else's legacy. Her warning isn't about weakness. It's about preservation. She's trying to protect the joy, the passion, the fire that makes Carlos special. The qualities that could be extinguished if we insist he burn in someone else's shape. A broken toy. That's what happens when you play too rough with something precious. When you force it into roles it wasn't designed for. When you value it only for how much it resembles something else. Virginia Garcia sees that danger. She's speaking up while there's still time to change course. While her son is still whole, still himself, still burning with his own fire. The question is whether the tennis world will listen to her, or whether we'll keep playing rough until something beautiful breaks.